Hello there. Albert is here, and in this video I'd like to tell you about one of my favorite moves in chess history, which was played by André Lilienthal in Hastings 1934, against José Raúl Capablanca. I don't want to give too many details because I don't want to spoil the game, so let's get straight into it. Lilienthal started the game with pawn to d4, Capablanca replied with knight f6. This opening is called Nimzo Indian defense. André continued with pawn to c4, then e6, knight to c3, and bishop to b4. Here, Lilienthal played pawn to a3, Samish variation. This move is considered to be an inaccuracy, because later on black will probably capture the knight anyway, so why would white waste tempo? Here, Capablanca took the knight, and André took the bishop with pawn. Then Capablanca played pawn to b6, planning to develop bishop to b5 or a6. André moved pawn to f3, to prepare e4. Capablanca played d5, then bishop to g5, h6, bishop to h4, and Capablanca played bishop to a6, to attack pawn on c4. Lilienthal played pawn to e4, continuing to occupy the center. This was actually an inaccuracy, because Capablanca could take the pawn, André would take it back, and then Capablanca would play pawn to g5, forcing bishop to g3, and then win a pawn. But instead, Capablanca decided to take pawn on c4 with bishop. Bishop to c4, pawn to c4, and then Lilienthal moved queen to a4, forking pawn and king. Queen to d7, and queen to c4. Then Capablanca offered an unfavorable queen trade, but Lilienthal said no, and put his queen to d3, behind his pawn wall. Then knight to d7, knight to d2, rook to d8, and Lilienthal castled. Capablanca could castle as well, but he played pawn to a5, which is also okay. Here, Lilienthal decided to put his queen to c2, and Stockfish doesn't like that move, because André gave away some space, instead of, for example, playing pawn to d5. Capablanca in reply pushed his queen forward to c4. André moved his pawn to f4 to prepare pawn to e5, to exploit the bishop pin. Capablanca saw it, and moved his rook to c8. Lilienthal pushed f-pawn again. Pawn to e5, André took it with d-pawn. And here, Capablanca decided to take pawn on e4 with his queen, attacking bishop and queen, but this was actually a blunder, and here Lilienthal saw a brilliant tactic. You can pause the video and try to find it yourself. Here, Lilienthal sacrificed his queen, and took knight on f6, starting a crushing attack on black. When Bobby Fischer saw Lilienthal at post-game press conference, instead of greeting, he exclaimed, "Pawn to f6. So, Capablanca took white queen, and André took pawn on g7, attacking the rook. Capablanca had to move it to g8. Then Lilienthal played knight to d4, attacking the queen, and preparing the rook to move to e1. Capablanca had already knew that he had to give away his queen, so he moved queen to e4, allowing André to pin it. Rook to e1, Capablanca moved knight to c5, in order to get at least some compensation for queen. Rook to e4, knight captured the rook, then rook to e1, pinning the knight. Capablanca took pawn on g7, André captured the knight with check. Here, Capablanca moved king to d7, and decided to resign. Despite the fact that Capablanca was only one pawn down, André's position was much stronger, and it is not a problem for a GM like Lilienthal to convert a position like this into a victory. So, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this chess match as much as I did, and see you on the next video.